Hello and welcome to Newspeak. I'm Peter Whittle. I'm joined, as usual, by our senior fellow, Rafe Heydel-Mankoo, royal historian and commentator, and Amy Gallagher, the woman behind Stand Up to Woke and the SNP mayoral candidate in London. Now, before we talk about the week's events, just a notice about two of our local events coming up this week. They are both on May the 7th. That's Tuesday, May the 7th in the evening, and they are in Milton Keynes and in Edinburgh. So two different events, both on May the 7th, this coming Tuesday in the evening. They're entirely free. It will be great to see you there, one or other of them. They're proving to be very, very popular all around the country. So if you would like to come and want to know the details of where and when, then please do write to locals@newcultureforum.org.uk and we will send you the details. So maybe see you there either in Milton Keynes or in Edinburgh. Right, well, this week, first of all, we have seen the what many people are seeing as a kind of real reversal for the woke agenda, Rafe, and that's in the resignation of the Scottish First Minister, Humza Yousaf.
Yes, so many people are sort of seeing in the car crash that was Humza Yousaf's decision to break up his coalition with the Green Party, the end of progressive politics in the UK. And you know, to a degree, there's a great deal of truth in that, I would say, on a certain level, because of course it was the trans issue, gender self-ID, that started the exit of Nicola Sturgeon. And of course, it was also the completely unrealistic attempt to try to reduce carbon emissions by 75% for net zero that led to this incident with the Green Party and the ending of that coalition. And certainly the emphasis now of John McSweeney, who seems to be the front runner to take over, and of course Kate Forbes, who's now pulled out of the race, a social conservative, is very much to steer the SNP back onto the one issue which it's really supposed to be about, which is Scottish independence, because of course it's a broad church. And really, after the referendum in 2014 for Scottish independence, there was no chance of having another referendum anytime soon, and so Nicola Sturgeon refashioned the SNP into sort of being this last bastion of progressive politics in the country against the Tories. And so the SNP was refashioned against the wishes of many SNP voters into this very, very woke party. And it was almost as if they were trying to cast themselves as the last remnant of this Scottish Enlightenment, whereas in the South you had these little Englanders, and trying to connect themselves to this mythical idea of a progressive left-wing Europe, which of course, as we now know, is completely false. But of course, we still have progressive politics on the British Isles. Wales is still very progressive, and Ireland, of course. It seems to be the Celtic nations are bucking the trend we see elsewhere in Europe, where everyone is leaning to the right, and of course England tends to lean more to the right. But the Celtic nations, because they're always contrasting themselves against the hated English Tories, have managed to continue this progressive politics. But it's also collapsing in Ireland. We've seen, of course, the Leo Varadkar had to resign after this failed constitutional amendment to try to remove references to the family and to women's place in the home. That was a catastrophic failure, and there's a huge backlash now against the immigration and asylum seekers in Ireland, which has seen a 400% increase. Further boosted, it seems to be, from the passing of the Rwanda bill in this country, which has led asylum seekers apparently to try to flee to the Republic of Ireland. So progressive politics really in the British Isles does seem to have been dealt a blow. But of course we say all of this at the same time that there's going to be a Labour election, but people aren't voting for the Labour Party, they're voting against the Conservative Party. So they aren't voting for progressive politics, I would say, but they're going to get it either way.
Yes. Also, I think you didn't mention that, of course, his hate crime bill, which was pretty comical in the end, wasn't it? There were thousands of complaints put to the police, and many of them were actually against him because he made that terrible speech. I still think it's probably the most outwardly racist speech I think I've ever seen from what you'd call a senior public figure. The thing is, though, I mean, he seemed so incompetent anyway as well, didn't he? I mean, there's this sort of that goes hand in hand often, doesn't it, with the woke people?
Yeah, I think the more incompetent you are, the more you lean into woke ideology, because it's what gets you views and it's what gets you attention, and it kind of covers over the fact that you haven't got much substance. But yeah, I mean, the whole hate crime bill was totally ridiculed and shown to be a complete farce by J.K. Rowling, essentially. And there was more complaints against Hamza Yousaf's white speech than there was against anything else. So it just was kind of a flash in the pan, basically. It was shown to be a complete nonsense. But the whole SNP is its whole identity has become very confused, because they were essentially, their main sort of policy was obviously wanting independence and freedom from the union, and they've actually ended up becoming a party that seems to want to impose very authoritarian bills and acts which seem to go against the idea of any freedom. It's so they almost want the freedom to impose an authoritarianism on Scotland through the hate crime bill, through the Gender Recognition Act. There was also a policy about imposing state guardians to interfere with kind of the family and see, so that the child has a parent and a state parent. It was quite very Orwellian. So they've undergone a kind of quite a huge sort of, I would say, identity crisis, and it's kind of difficult to know what they really stand for anymore, apart from a kind of a progressivism. And then this kind of coalition with the Greens has meant that they're progressive, but they're not radically progressive in the way that the Greens are, in that they want to kind of draw the line at opposing the Cass review, which is essentially what the Greens have done. The Greens that have essentially been arguing for climate change and calling anyone that disagrees with them kind of science deniers or climate change deniers, anybody that opposes net zero, and yet they are the party that are now opposing the evidence base of the Cass review, which is
they're actually officially opposing it.
They reject the findings of the Cass review. And I mean, even the mayoral candidate, the Green candidate for London, is saying that she knows that the Cass review is probably causing a lot of trauma and discomfort for trans people, and it's very problematic. So they've moved away from the issue of green into the issue of transgenderism, and it does seem to be this issue that's had a huge impact for the SNP. I mean, I remember an interview you did a couple of years ago, Peter, with Rod Liddell, and he was saying about that the end of woke will be brought about by this trans issue, because so many ordinary people will not go along with the fact that a man can be a woman and vice versa. And it does seem to be that is the case. It is really having quite an impact on, politics.
Yes, I think, yes. I mean, that would be great if that were the case. I think that they are moving on now. We're going to talk about that later, but they're moving on now. This Gaza thing, that is moving, it's sort of shifting. Point is, mention that speech he made. Many people might not have seen, but the leader of Labour, Scottish Labour, a guy called Anna Sawyer, I think, and he made an almost identical speech. Let's just take a look before we talk about it. Here it is.
Every chief executive of every council and every government department, white. Every director of a department in Scotland, white. Every principal of a college or university in Scotland, white. Every head teacher in Scotland, white. Every chair of a public sector body in Scotland, white. Every High Court judge in Scotland, white. Every prison governor in Scotland, white. Every editor of a news organisation in Scotland, white. Why?
It's interesting, isn't it, Noel, that even in the setup, actually, with the people behind him and everything, it's almost a duplicate, isn't it, of the speech being made. But you see, that tends to give the lie to the idea that this is a big setback for woke, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it's so similar to that speech. I mean, I wish someone would do a meme and say, First Minister of Scotland, Brown, Leader of the Opposition, Brown, Mayor of London, Brown, Prime Minister of the UK, Brown, Prime Minister, last Taoiseach of Ireland, Brown. But it is interesting, isn't it? Where you've no one has pointed that fact out. And is it, did those two characters get there by the virtue of their qualifications or by the colour of their skin? This is what the incompetence you've seen from Hamza Useless. I think demonstrates the fact that he clearly wasn't the right candidate for the job. And whether it's him or whether it's Dame Sharon White, the CEO of the former CEO of John Lewis, it's an issue now of prioritizing identity over excellence and over competence. And we are companies, institutions, governments are willfully self-harming themselves in the interest of pursuing an ideology. It's absolutely insane. I mean, Hamza Yusuf was definitely not up to the task of governing. There's good reason to believe that the Labour leader also is similarly not up to the task of forming a government in the future in Scotland, which probably will be the case once you get the next SNP elections. And but it does suggest, that woke definitely has got a lot more legs in it. And I don't know whether, we can hope to see any light at the end of the tunnel, given that the Labour in Scotland are just as wedded to the hate bill. And indeed, when you had talks coming up about the future of Hamza Yusuf and what deals could be done and so forth, nobody ever mentioned the hate bill as one of the issues that they wanted to see change on.
Yes, I think it is. I would tend to agree. I think it's a false dawn, because I think Trudeau was quite badly damaged recently, wasn't he? And also the Jacinda Ardern from New Zealand, that's the name of it. She kind of left, and she was at one point considered to be the sort of, banner holder for woke, and she went, and everything. Well, this is maybe the end of this era. I don't think so at all. I think it takes a long time for these things to filter down to all the institutions that are actually captured by it, I think, don't you?
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, a lot of people are hailing this as a victory against woke, the fact that Hamza Yusuf has had to resign. But as you said, with this leader of the Scottish Labour Party, Ash Sora, he's almost like a carbon copy of what's his name? Hamza Yusuf. He's a young sort of Asian male, and he's doing this same speech about white people, and it does feel very much like kind of whack-a-mole with progressivism, that you get rid of one and then another pops up, and the personnel might change, but the ideology doesn't change at all.
Actually, it's interesting. On my way here, I was looking at watching a little clip of Andrew Neil speaking. And he was talking about how he was in Scotland recently. He doesn't go there very much anymore, obviously Scottish man. And he was just generally very sad at what he saw as the overall cultural state and decline of Scotland. That it's gone from being this, disproportionately responsible for the British Empire, shall we say. I mean, in terms of its administrators and people. Extraordinarily inventive country, to being a kind of victim-obsessed woke, which is the same thing, is it not?
Yeah, it's a remarkable transformation. I mean, the Scots and the Jews are two tiny minorities who have achieved so much beyond the size of their population. And I used to say often, when did the Greeks stop being Greek? Oh, I've said that about Britain, but it also applies even more so to Scotland, the land of the Enlightenment, of Hume and everything else, the Industrial Revolution. I mean, the number of chaps that they had at the forefront of the Industrial Revolution, and the way that it's been recast since the 1980s, despite the fact that it's not overwhelmingly left-wing. I mean, this is another of these great myths that has been fostered over recent years, is that somehow they are radically socialist. 40% of the country voted for Brexit. It wasn't a huge. The idea that there are no Brexiteers in Scotland. The Conservative Party was the second largest party in the 2019 general election, and I've got many friends in Scotland who are all very small c conservative and big C conservative, and they tell me with great anguish what it's like to live there when they're constantly being having their own history denied them, in the sense of the idea that everyone in this country is somehow left-wing and socialist and hates Thatcher and hates everything to do with conservatism. And there's still a very strong element of that there, but it's never given an airing, because again, all of the levers of communication in Scotland are controlled by the left.
Yeah, and also there's this feeling. I mean, I when I was last there, you get this feeling in certain cities that you're slightly behind enemy lines. I don't sound paranoid about this, but I mean, you can sort of feel it. And then what happens? The Queen dies. When she had her body was driven from Balmoral to Edinburgh, amazing crowds came out all the way along. I mean, that really surprised me. I thought, I mean, maybe you can put a lot of that down to the Queen's particular status, but even so, it was very respectful and extraordinary.
I think we have to remember that as well. That's a very important point to make, because, you know, we get so frustrated with the Scottish nationalists, and I know so many people I speak to and I see comments like, well, let the damn Scots go, you know, who cares about them? And I always say, wait a minute, there are, you know, half the nation wants to stay in the Union, and we can't abandon those people who are British to their bone and want to remain part of the UK. And I always try to remember those people.
And there's so much deprivation in Scotland. You know, the socioeconomic status of some people and educational kind of standards are very low compared to England in some areas of Scotland, and you know, and crime rates and so on. And that is not being dealt with by the SNP at all. I mean, they're, you know, bringing in a hate speech law when they've got, you know, far bigger issues, and they've been, you know, the Scottish people have been totally let down by their politicians, I think.
I mentioned there are these the Gaza demonstrations and everything, which is taking off this week and promises to be much bigger here. I don't think anything's happened in Scotland so far, but I mean, what we're talking about really is that there are these encampments that have grown up in America, particularly in Colombia, in New York, have taken over the university basically. And the National Guard has gone in and what have you. And there's copycat versions of this happening here. Do you think this is basically, would you say this is the new BLM? That's how I look at it. The same thing.
Yeah, it feels similar. It's different in some ways, but pretty much the same. It feels the same kind of tactics. The same kind of like youth politics, very privileged students in Ivy League universities. We've seen scenes in Colombia with activist students occupying the university and demanding that the university gives them food and water. They're actually demanding humanitarian aid for themselves, not for the Palestinians or for Jewish people, but for themselves. Essentially saying that it's the job of the university to feed them and stop them from dehydrating. So it really is kind of toddler stuff. You know, they want to be fed and watered by the academics.
No bagels though.
No.
Did you see that?
Oh really?
No bagels. They said don't. We don't want bagels.
Yeah, with a slice of anti-Semitism
yes, this
alongside.
Is not. I'm not kidding.
No, it's not. I mean, they're saying they want self-defense lessons to defend themselves against Jews or pro-Israel protesters, and we've also seen kind of quite shocking scenes of people in the University of California, essentially all suddenly seemingly converting to Islam, that they are praying and doing the call to prayer and worshipping Allah, and these are sort of largely middle-class white Americans, girls, women, yes, and you know, suddenly it is like BLM, but to me, I think it's more concerning than BLM, because it's also they're adopting literally a new religion alongside this kind of. I think there's lots of things going on. It's an attack on the West. And I think they will readily adopt Islam for that reason, because it's an attack on the West. But I also think there's a kind of a nihilism or a meaninglessness that going on. They, you know, maybe the excesses of liberalism have meant that young people, you know, they're uncertain and they don't have a community, and they will adopt any kind of radical ideology that gives them a sense of meaning, a sense of purpose, a sense of being a part of something, whether that be Islam or whether it be the radical left. It's really shocking to see, and it's I mean, some of them are wearing hijabs and they're acting like they are themselves Palestinians that need food and water and need protection within the confines of an Ivy League university. It's beggars belief.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's always the question goes out. I was on GB News about it this week. Couldn't they just also be people who desperately don't want to see people being killed? I'm afraid I don't believe that. I think that the actual issues in these cases are becoming quite secondary.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, this is about the wider war on the West, and this is just simply ratcheting up of the degree to which our universities have been captured by cultural Marxism. And isn't it interesting, you know, that since October the 7th, we haven't seen really any protests or marches by Just Stop Oil or by Extinction Rebellion. We had all been told that we were 2 minutes from global annihilation, but now apparently it's more important that they protest against Israel suddenly, almost as if it's a fashion rather than these are actual real causes that they are trying to support. And really, you know, this is the first time we have seen this sort of thing since 1968 during the Vietnam War, which again, these protests started on campuses in America and then they spread to campuses in the UK, despite the fact that Britain wasn't involved in the Vietnam War. So what is the point of having these protests in universities when Britain has no influence over Israel, as it's just the same way it wasn't involved in the Vietnam War? And these, you know, if any institutions in the UK are more likely to be sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, it is these universities. You know, you're not, you know, you're pushing against an open door when it comes to this sort of a thing, and you're making an environment where Jewish students feel unsafe to go about what they're doing. But you know, we are getting to a stage in radical left politics and protest where we're getting close to, if not surpassing, the 1970s. If you remember, when you had the Bader-Meinhof, you had the Weather Underground, you had Black September, and what's happening in America is that university campuses are being infiltrated by Antifa and by these radical organizations that are training students in defense techniques and resistance and activism, and they're sort of getting paramilitary type groups going in there with faces covered, weapons and all this sort of thing. And where are the hope not hates of this world? Where are all of those people who are so quick to jump on a bunch of English patriots with their faces uncovered, completely disorganized, just having a gathering to celebrate their national day? And here you have very well organized, sinister underground groups with faces covered doing all of this, and even in the mainstream media they won't be named. Now, funnily enough, you know, some of the UK university protests are being organized by similar organizations. One is called SOAS, Detainee Support. And what is their motto? No borders, no prisons.
Yeah.
BLM is actually involved in these protests as well. And there's another organization that's involved, and its chant is no borders, no nations, stop deportations. That's what's at the heart of all of this. This is an attack on the nation state. They don't want borders, they want mass immigration. This is the radical left cultural Marxists right at the core of this, and they are using our liberal values and tolerance and freedoms to protest to advance this sinister agenda.
Actually, illustrating that is someone caught sight of all the placards that are being used in America, which are exactly the same placards being used here. Suddenly, you know, these have managed to go en masse, you know, across the world.
Yeah.
So it's being organised. I mean, there's no question about it. You know, I would completely agree. And this is borne out by the fact that the people often involved in these are spectacularly ignorant of the actual facts, aren't they?
Well, this is the issue, that essentially these are extremely, although they're in places of supposed to be of education, they're actually extremely ignorant. And what's happened is that the universities only have themselves to blame for this, because they've become sites not of education but of activism. They've been teaching political activism for years, and it's not surprising that suddenly the students adopt that activism and turn on the universities and occupy them. I mean, I saw some footage of some students in America saying to the professor, well, we're paying for this, so you need to meet our demands because we're paying for this, so you need to do what we tell you. So essentially they see themselves as not as students but as customers. You know, that you should give us what and perhaps there is something in that, because they're not getting a good education, and maybe deep down they know that they're not getting a good education, so they feel that they're well within their rights to demand that the professors do what they tell them to. So it's a kind of an unholy alliance between the students and the professors in some way.
And also the third sector are the university authorities, who now probably are enablers, I would say. It's not unlike when you mentioned the eco protesters, we know when they destroy these pictures, you sort of think, how did they get there? And why are they not being reprimanded? Why, you know, what's actually going on here? Are they the people involved sort of sympathetic actually, and you sort of think maybe they are.
Well, of course they're sympathetic, and we've seen professors in America getting arrested. They are absolutely encouraging their students to protest, because the people who are now professors were the students of 1968, right? This is what we're talking about, and university administration departments are absolutely at the core of the woke agenda, of the woke spread through universities, and that's why you haven't seen, for example, when that painting was attacked. The woman wasn't arrested, she wasn't suspended, received no penalties. In America, one of the reasons that so many university presidents, like at Columbia and so forth, are under pressure to resign now is because they were so slow to act, because deep down they actually sympathise with all of this. And what the British universities, having seen what's happened in America, need to do is ensure that they have a robust plan in place to clamp down on any violence or intimidation should it arise, because there are tents already being set up in London and elsewhere.
Yes, indeed, Imperial College, I believe,
and Goldsmiths as well.
And Goldsmiths. Yes, in fact, one little glimmer of light here. A group of frat boys in America got together to defend the Stars and Stripes, and they put a GoFundMe page up and got $400,000 almost overnight.
To throw a party. I think they wanted to throw a party.
But they also wanted to protect also, dare I say, it's all. Do you sense a kind of a gender difference here? You've got the guys, these kind of young frat boys, and the other side it seems to be mostly women.
It's white middle class women who are donning the hijab and praying to Allah.
That's really fun. Do they even realise that they wouldn't be able to do that actually under Islam?
Yeah, I know that they're siding with an extremely patriarchal religion and culture. I don't know if it's just that they are so demoralised by liberalism and its uncertainties and its individualism that they're willing to side with something that is, that offers strength and certainty. I don't know that that's maybe what these women need or want, or maybe they're just ignorant, or maybe they're just misled. It's difficult to know, but it does feel that it is that the genders are separating a bit more on these issues.
Yes. Well, we know that for a fact. I mean, it wasn't always the case. There was a time decades ago where women were more conservative, but they do clearly subscribe more to progressive views and positions. And you can just see it in any of the protests, be it Just Stop Oil, be it BLM. There is always a much higher proportion of middle-class women in general, but also ethnic minority women than you get from men.
It's a kind of a misplaced compassion, isn't it? I mean, they have maybe a maternal instinct, but it's kind of coming out in completely the wrong way, that they're ending up caring about people in another country, and then it becomes very narcissistic. It becomes about them and their demands. And you just think that they're quite lost, actually.
Well, it's quite pathetic and ridiculous to see these people, belly buttons exposed, tank tops, bare arms and tight shorts, bending down, praying to Allah. I mean, it's...
next to guys, next to men. Which is something that would never, ever happen. Also, there's something else that's completely related to this, and the Bibby Stockholm, which happened this week in Peckham. A group of these... I say these people because they're the same, aren't they, basically? Got together and managed to thwart an attempt to, ship out some illegal migrants from Peckham. And they succeeded, didn't they, by sheer pressure of numbers. The people went back to their hotel that they're staying in Peckham. And it reminded me rather of these incidents as well on planes where people have been deported. I feel that, you can't, maybe with demonstrators, it's difficult, but I feel that when that happens, those people should be held responsible for anything that might happen after, shouldn't they? I mean, there was a case, in both cases, I think, recently, one guy has just actually been convicted and is now in jail for rape. But he was actually saved from deportation by these passengers, for goodness sake, Now, it's the same sort of principle. The difference might be that these people in Peckham were obviously just politically motivated.
And they weren't from Peckham, it was clear. They were almost, once again, they were all white middle class, and primarily also mainly women, it must be said as well. And they clearly weren't local, they had come from outside. I mentioned these organisations again. They were all involved here. These are hardcore radicals who don't believe in the nation state, don't believe in borders, and they want to essentially to have a completely porous border for anyone to come over here. I mean, it's sheer insanity, and not to even want to have prisons. You know, I mean, they don't believe that prisons should exist either. This is the sort of mentality that you're dealing with, and I can't believe that our police weren't able to foresee that this was going to happen. You know, you compare our police to the police in Germany and in Holland, who are fully prepared. I mean, and they have large, huge sticks and things. That's not even their riot gear. They've got things to deal with this sort of stuff. And to see our police once again proving themselves to be so ineffectual, allowing the tyres of this coach to be slashed so that it couldn't go away, I think it was a completely preventable situation from happening. Patrick Christie from GB News went down with his camera crew to film this. They were assaulted. And these chaps, again, very organised. We have to get to realise the degree to which all of this is being organised by actors who know what they're doing, and then you get the useful idiot university students and others who support them out of ignorance. But everybody wearing face coverings around this coach, covering up the GB News camera because they didn't want to be filmed. I mean, this is all very tactical and very, very deliberate what's going on. This is not part of the Rwanda scheme. This is about the Bibby Stockholm. But I just hope that having had this lesson, the police will come back better prepared.
Well, fat chance, I'm afraid, because I feel the police are sort of enablers as well. You know, there's no question about it. I mean, it is, you mentioned, Rafe, these various associations in relation to the students. Who is funding them, do you think?
Well, it's funny because I went to the website of this SOAS detainee support network, and they have a job offer, £28,000 a year for a national coordinator. So obviously money's coming from somewhere. You know where it's coming from, whether it's just small crowdfunding donations, the money is there. But of course, when you are primarily attracting middle-class people, there's money there, right? And I'm sure lots of these sort of people you see on Just Stop Oil are the types of people who are putting money into this.
But isn't this also Soros's sort of general territory?
Yeah, I mean, it could easily be.
Yeah.
But it definitely is coordinated, because when you saw this group in Peckham who were all linking arms around this coach, they were all of them wearing pandemic masks. Obviously the pandemic ended, you know, years ago, and nobody's wearing masks anymore, so they've obviously been told to do that. And it's almost like the hijab and the pandemic mask are converging now as a means to cover your face. You know, it's got all sorts of meanings now that it didn't used to have before. But yeah, it's extremely concerning to see, and it's almost a bit like when America sneezes, the UK catches a cold. You know, we get a version of what's happening in America here, maybe not as extreme. These students aren't quite praying to Allah yet, but they are, you know, propping up a kind of anti-Western sentiment, and it seems to be again like these students in America, totally against their own interests. If they're young women, we know that asylum seekers, well, the influx of mass immigration and asylum seekers is going to affect younger people's prospects of career prospects and ability to buy a home. And it also affects women because they are primarily the victims of sexual assault and rape, which we know increases when mass immigration and asylum seekers increase in the UK. So it's totally against their own interests, and you just think, do you know what you're potentially, you know, advocating for here? These people could be criminals. We don't know.
I think, I mean, you know, we're gonna, you know, they say incidents are not terror related, for example. You know, the police say this. I think we might wake up one day with another category, terrorism. This is not immigration related or asylum related, because this is the next big story, I think. This crime and the general rise in crime.
Well, the general rise in sexual crime, particularly, which is so shocking. And yeah, these women are turkeys voting for Christmas. And the big difference between the two protests we're discussing, the Gaza protests and these deportation protests, is in ethnicity. Because I would say the majority of people on university campuses protesting are Muslim. There's a sizable minority of white people there as well, but it's primarily Muslim run and Muslim led by Muslim student bodies. These ones were exclusively white people. I couldn't see a single ethnic minority protesting these, and that's a rather telling interest about priorities and issues and concerns.
I see that Trump as well has kind of put his, you know, 2 pence worth in, generally saying, isn't it? Paris is going the way of London, i.e. not any more recognisable, largely because of these kind of factors. It's interesting, there hasn't been such a big to-do about that this time, mainly because maybe people are looking and say, well, maybe he's got a point.
Well, I was just in Liverpool for the NCF Locals launch event, and I have to say how happy I felt. It felt as if I'd gone into a time machine and gone back to the 1980s when London, they have, it's about 83% of Liverpool is white. That's what we had in London in the 1980s. And that's about enough diversity. It gives it some flavour. You can get all your recipes and all your restaurants, you can get enough of that diverse mix. But the cultural homogeneity in Liverpool was so apparent, and people were just so friendly, and going on public transport there was a pleasure, actually. And it was just such a huge contrast to the way things are in London now. And because when you live in a city like this, you get so used to the way things are that you forget the way things used to be. And going to Liverpool, I suddenly remembered this was only 30 or 40 years ago we had this same sort of situation in London, and it was very telling.
Yes, it's remarkable, isn't it? That's unusual for a major city now in Britain, Liverpool.
Well, Liverpool is very much an outlier.
Yeah, it's very, very unusual. And of course, we're at the end of a week where we've had these municipal elections in London and the mayoralty in Manchester as well. And of course, this is going out on the day when these results are sort of going to be coming out. So, well, it's been an interesting experience for you, I guess, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's been very interesting. I've enjoyed it. I've learned a lot about politics, and I've somewhat developed as a person. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen with the mayoralty. I mean, it's very different this year because it's the first time you only get one vote, and it's the first time you have to have voter ID. So it'd be interesting to see how that affects that. I think the Conservatives feel that both of those things are going to go in their favour. But of course, a lot of people are feeling that the Conservative candidate, Susan Hall, isn't as strong as previous candidates. She's not very well known. So I don't know how that's going to affect the vote overall. I think that there may well be a less of a turnout than usual because I think people are just generally sick of politics and politicians. A lot of people don't like Labour or Tories, so we'll have to see. But yeah, I mean, obviously the party that I'm with is quite a small party, but I've had some positive responses so far, so we'll see.
No, it's you might, depending on when you're watching this, it might still be yet to come, the results, or indeed, you might be switching off because you know them already. Because we certainly don't at this stage. There's a chance, is there not, with this voter ID thing, that Khan, I can't believe Khan won't get in, but I mean, there's a chance that it will be dented, his majority, by this ID business, surely, won't it? That's why he was so opposed to it.
Yeah, and he was putting out desperate tweets yesterday saying that there's a chance, there's no chance Susan Hall was going to win this, but certainly the fact is his majority may be much smaller than perhaps they were hoping and expecting. But on my way home last night, I picked up the free copy of the Metro newspaper, which is given out free, and on page 3 there was a big pro Sadiq ad, and the back page was an entire ad, and then for Sadiq Khan, and there was nothing for the Conservatives and Susan Hall. Such a badly managed campaign, such a poor candidate. If we had had Sean Bailey, someone like that again this time, I think perhaps you would have been able to defeat him because he's an ethnic minority. ULEZ is now an issue that it wasn't at the last election when he stood and almost beat Sadiq Khan. And I think if the planets had aligned better, we would have seen an end to Khan.
I'm not quite sure. Just as a matter of fact, could he stand for a fourth, Khan?
I don't think there's anything in the Constitution.
There's nothing to say. I mean, it's just it's pure good manners and courtesy not to. That's obviously gone out the window. Oh well, you'll be. I'm sure you won't be celebrating. You will be commiserating, I'm sure, by the end of the day when we watch this. London is on a downward spiral. I'm sorry, but what else can you say, right? As usual, we always like to end on a very bleak note. So we've done that. But anyway, I hope on the journey there, you've got something out of our talk. Thank you very much, Amy. Thanks very much, Rafe. And we shall see you next week. Okay, in the meantime, have a lovely week. Bye.
Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.